Okay, so we're moving on to the more complex form drawings. And I don't think I'm gonna talk too much during this video because there's not too much to say. I really don't think that this drawing needs a demonstration from me, but I will demonstrate it because I know that some of you or a lot of you are intimidated by something so complex, but everything that we've discussed already will give you the tools that you need to create something like this. So the very first thing we want to do, as always, is we want to measure, and we want to make sure that things are going to be in the right place. So again, I'm going to use the sight size method of measuring. So I'm going to measure from the edge of the paper and from the edge of the paper here to know where the beak ends as far as that's concerned. Now I want to know how wide the beak is, at least to that point, so I'm going to do the same thing again. And remember that the measurements are just a guide, that, you know, measurements aren't perfect. I want to know where the tip of the beak is. I've shown some of you already that you kind of use the longitude, latitude technique. So if you measure it from the bottom and the top, that gives you an idea of where it should go. So you combine it there and it should go there. And if we measure from the corner, it should be the same, approximately. And that is, so the tip of the beak is here. Now you want to know where the top of the beak is. So the top of the beak should be somewhere here. This is the side. So just with that little bit of information, you can start to sketch this out. At least the beak. I'm trying something a little bit different with the lighting, so hopefully I don't get a lot of glare. Alright, I do want to know where the end of the beak is here. So I'm going to measure from the bottom. And I'm going to make a little dot there. And now I want to measure from the side. And measure from the side. I think that's pretty good. It's not perfect, but we're not really looking for perfect. So this is the side of the beak. Now you do have to pay attention to detail. I think the most important thing and when doing a drawing like this is just noticing all the little things. So just be very observant. Notice that this doesn't go all the way down to the beak. We have this extension. And even though I made that here, that's fine. We just have to erase it a bit. I might have to find an eraser. Because these types of drawings do require a lot of erasing. So, okay, got an eraser. And let's just make sure this spot is in the right place. And we're going to measure from the edge of the paper to that corner. The edge of the paper to that corner. So that spot is in the right place. Now if you observe your line carefully, and even with all your measurements, some things may be off. Like I said, our measurements are approximate, meaning that they're not perfect. You can measure how thick you want this to be, how thick you want that to be. Alright, and how far does this go in? The tip of the beak to where the bottom of the beak is? Not that far. That far. Another thing I'm going to say is make sure that your pencil is sharp. Notice the little nuances of the beak. It isn't a perfect tip. And try to notice how it curves. It isn't perfectly straight either. There's a little kind of, this hawk has kind of like a little smirk. So the hawk has like a bit of a smirk. this goes up at the end, and that makes a big difference because visually we communicate a lot through facial expressions, so it really feels different to a person that's looking at it. Alright, so I feel confident with that bit for the top of the beak. Now I'm going to do the bottom of the beak. Again, I want to just measure where this ends exactly, and it ends right there. And that means we're going to come up from there. And I just want to look at both of them. This kind of goes out, it curves up. There's a very thin area here, so I got to alter something. Yeah, this has to be thicker here at the top. And I'm going to erase that old line. Wow, it's supposed to be a good eraser, but it's not. Doesn't look too good right now. Alright, this eraser is not helping me, so I'm going to go try to find another one. Got another eraser. It'll be a little bit better than that one. And it is. I think that's good enough so the drawing is not lost here. Alright, that's the beak. Zoom in a little bit on that. So you just make your measurements, try to make sure everything is in the right place, and you'll be in good shape. Just using the size method. Again, if we want to put where the nostril is, we could go ahead and measure it from the bottom and the top. Not that it has to be super perfect either. So like from here. Make sure you see look at the shape of the nostril carefully. It's not a square, it's got a very distinctive shape. Just try to match that the best that you can. And I'm not into matching value just yet, but I am going to just shade that a little bit. So right now we're just taking care of the line drawing aspect of this before we get into matching value. Okay, time to determine. Once you're happy with it, you can outline it a little bit darker, but not too dark. Remember, no dark outlines. Now it's time to determine where the shoulder begins. We're going to go ahead and measure that from the edge of the paper and from the edge of our paper, and we're going to put a line, and that's where the shoulder is going to start. We could see another line just slightly higher. It's gonna kind of give us a connect the dots type of thing, and it should guide us in the right direction with our measurements. Oh, it helps if you have them next to each other to make sure that it's not too high or too low. I do want that little corner right there. And then we're going to go by the neck. So midway through the neck is right here. And check out where it ends on the bottom beak. And just take that measurement and bring that over, and by your bottom beak, make that measurement. So like I said before, we kind of have a connect the dot situation right here. Just because it's one of those doesn't mean that you should stop paying attention to the line. So look at the line carefully, and right here you see the feathers start to take shape. There is a very thin white border. Don't concern yourself with that thin white border. So you could either stop before it or just continue like it's not even there. All right, now it's time to put in this eyebrow. We're gonna measure from the edge, measure from the edge, and that tells you where that eyebrow is going to start. We could go right there to the corner where the beak is. Corner where the beak is. It's going to start there. It goes up ever so slightly, and then it starts to curve back. So that line I made is a bit misleading. Let's see. The top of the beak, now I'm going to throw an imaginary line here, and I'm going to throw that same line here to see where this kind of ends, right? If I measure it from there to there, from there to there, so we can, guesstimate that this shape is safe if we do it like that. Okay, now we'll continue. Just taking care of the drawing. Measure from the top. Measure from the top, make your little line where the top should be. Measure again, measure again, measure again. So it's safe to assume that the top is here, right? And this top should connect to here. So it's going to come down at a slant. And there's a little spike here. We should just put that in place. Now, let's go ahead and check where that eye is. So we're going to measure from the beak to the bottom of the eye. Or you could do the eyelid. Let's go ahead and do the eyelid. Doesn't matter. We're going to do them both anyways. So from the beak to the bottom eyelid. Now to the top eyelid. Or the higher up eyelid, which is this one. And now to the top of the eye. Top of the eye. So right here, my camera might fall again. Don't fall, camera. Be nice. Okay, now to the top of the eye. The top of the eye. Now it's important to realize that the eye is at a slant. These are just measurement lines. So we have to remember to slant the eye, right? So it's kind of like a sideways teardrop. But before we do that, I want to make sure we're putting it in the right place. So we have kind of the latitude, I think. Now we have to look for the longitude. Or we have the vertical. Now let's look for the width. I'm not sure if any of that is right. So let's go ahead and measure where the tear duct is. And it should be here, but let's make sure. Maybe our eye is too low. Yeah, it's a bit too high on my drawing. Oh, maybe not. Because if we measure it here and we use relational proportion, we can see that it falls in line with the beak. So either the beak needs to be higher, which it might need to be, or I think I see what's going on. My beak is slanted here a bit more, while that beak, for the reference, is going like this. Yeah. So if you're able to catch a mistake like that, just fix it. Oops. It won't make an enormous difference in the end result, but it always helps to improve your vision a bit when you get a chance. And okay. It's important to keep your pencil sharp, so my pencil snapped and I had to go and sharpen it. Okay, let's go back to measuring where the placement of the eye is going to be. So just slightly from the bottom, right here. Slightly from the bottom, right here. Okay, so that's much better. So this is tilting up. Pay attention to the shape of the eye. It is like there's a corner right here and it goes back. I want to see how long the eye is, how long the eye is, and it's about that long. Make your measurement. Look at the top lid, and that comes and it curves right here, and it's a bit more rounded here at the back. And just remember, like a sideways teardrop. Now, this is the measurement we took for the bottom lid. So let's just put that in place quickly. And if you feel confident at this point, you could go ahead and put in the eye, or just the shape of the eye. Okay. We don't see the whole circle. Again, just observe carefully, because the bottom of the iris, whatever it's called, is below here, below the bottom lid. So I don't want to see any eyes that show the whole eye. You don't want to darken too much at this stage, because there's a lot of different shadow stuff going on in the eye, which we will address when it comes time to do that. Okay, let's go ahead and see where this slant is. See how this is kind of has a slant, and just if you use relational proportion, you can see that it coincides very closely to the top of the beak. The question is, how far does it come out? It comes out about that far. So it starts here, and where does it end is the question. It's better to measure in straight lines, even though I know that that's slanted. It's just so you don't mess up your measurement. So it ends here. So very lightly, you can see that it ends there. Use the relational proportion to see how much higher than the eye it goes. And it doesn't go too much higher. And there's a little curve up. Pay attention to the direction of line. And it slants straight down. And I think that's pretty safe there. I'm going to get rid of this guideline that I used to help me do the beak initially. So I don't think I need it anymore. And get rid of some of those guidelines and these, as a matter of fact. Just clean it up a bit. So that's in place. Now we can see where these start to curve. Now, a lot of you might not realize it, but there isn't that many of these points. And I actually prefer if you just count them. So just count them. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Of course, we're going to take some measurements to see where each one of these ends up being. So from the left side, for instance, we're going to measure from here to here. And from over here, we're going to measure from here to here. So that tells me that that one is somewhere around there. We can put the papers very close together, and that way we can see if I'm too high or too low. And right now, I'm a bit too low. So we're going to put it here. Okay, now it's time for the next one. Well, before we do that one, let's make sure that we get the point inside. That's important to tell us where to end it. So we're going to get that point inside and that point inside. Remember, these are just measurements, so these can change, and there's many different ways to measure, as I have already taught you right there. Do that right there. Those are very small. Now, by observing the line, constantly looking back, we're going to start to put this in. This one comes up, goes out like this, comes up again. Okay. The last few I just drew in, but they're probably incorrect. Whenever you do something like that, it ends up being wrong. And sure enough, it is. It needs to be way over there. That's what happens when you don't measure. You make mistakes. And that one is way back. Let's double check. Yep. And that means we have to go very deep with that one. Okay, now always make sure that you can see your reference. And yeah, so if we put it like this, it helps us gauge where to start, where to end, and where to start. There you go. And that should give us about 7. That should be about the same. And now we need to go back here. So let's go ahead and using the set size method, both of these things close together, we're going to just, let's measure it so we don't make a mistake. I just said when you don't measure you make mistakes, and it's true even for me. And we're going to just curve that this way. Yeah, may not be perfect, but it's good enough. Now we can start to curve that down. So gauge, we're using relational proportion, see where this curve is compared to this. It's about midway through, so it's about midway through. Now, again, using relational proportion, see where this tip ends compared to this one. And they end about in the same place. It's got a little detail in there. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So okay, yeah, so the basic outline of the hawk is done. You just saw how to do it. Now I want to start drawing the shapes for the shadow, and that's what we're going to do next. Believe it or not, you do have to measure the shapes of the shadow. So like I want to see where this starts to curve. So I'm going to measure it. It starts to curve right there. It starts to curve right there. So we're going to put that in. Okay. This is actually a big shape here. Let me just measure where that cluster of feather ends. So it ends somewhere right around there. Curve that up. And if you want to be really precise, like if, I know very few of us have OCD, actually I have OCD, but we all have a little bit. And if your little bit of OCD is bugging you a lot, then you can measure absolutely everything and it'll be as perfect as you can get it. I think it's important to just measure enough to where you get a likeness. When you're dealing with people, or when you're drawing people or painting people, it's very important to make sure every single little measurement is precise. But when you're dealing with animals, I mean, as long as it looks like a hawk, I think you're in good shape, because typically animals are used as symbolism, and whatever a hawk represents, be that stealth or, I don't know, just a predator in general, it doesn't matter if every little detail is exactly the same as your reference. People get the idea that it's a hawk and it is whatever it is, and whatever it's meant to be or meant to represent. So again, just don't stop measuring. It might seem tedious, but it really saves you a lot of time, and at the end of it you're going to have a great drawing, and I'll give you enough time in class to make sure that you're good. This project for me is a bit more challenging and also a bit more fun now that we're done with the basics, but a lot of students need the basics before they can move on to something like this. I mean, I can't start you on something like this, or you won't understand what I mean when I talk about measuring, or you know, just getting basic shapes or following lines to make sure that your lines are going in the right direction. So all those basic assignments have their purpose, you know. They have their purpose. It does reach a point where you kind of, for me anyways, I mean, I could measure this to the ends of the earth and it would look exactly like the reference, and I might regret not measuring later, but it does reach a point where you have to kind of let loose a little bit. And still maybe measure little things. Kind of let loose when you start shading. Let loose a little bit. All these shapes are just to guide us, right? Because once we start measuring, it's all subject to change. And whenever I'm drawing anything, I constantly look back at the reference to make sure that my lines are going in the right direction, and just that I have the general likeness. Finished drawing that feather. I curved this because there's a line going that way. So at this point we're just breaking it down into line, and just start drawing the shape, the basic shape of these feathers. Start drawing them in, and when we start shading later, it's going to make everything a lot easier. At the same time, they don't have to be absolutely perfect, so don't obsess over it too much. Just draw it and move on. You know, if you can't get it, analyze it, reanalyze it, look at it to make sure you make your measurements. Make sure your lines are going in the right direction, but don't beat yourself up too bad over this. That's that cluster of feathers. There's one missing right here, which we're going to put in right now. There you go. So that's the last batch right there. I am going to go ahead and maybe add a little border here. Just a tiny one. Alright, now on to the next cluster of feathers, which is right here. And there really isn't that many, because when you guys think of feathers, you think, well, there's a million feathers, but there's not. Even in this cluster, you could break it down, and here it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11 is a number you can all count to. So there's not this astronomical number of feathers, so don't get overwhelmed by that. And I'm not measuring too much at this point. I think too much measuring kind of takes away from the fun. I am using some other measurement techniques, like relation of proportion, primarily checking to see how things line up, where one thing ends compared to the other. So don't give up on all your measurement techniques. I just stopped using the sight size method of measurement, which is more accurate than sight size. But when you're dealing with feathers or when you're dealing with hair, you know, it's okay to ease up a little bit. erase your guidelines as you go, as you move along, so they don't confuse you as you get more detailed with whatever it is you are doing. This was a guideline, so I think I'm gonna remove it. Pay attention to the shadow here. Make sure you put the shadow in its appropriate place. And just very lightly make a few lines as to where the shadow is going to be. Do some lines to indicate that there will be shadows here. Oh, there's a very distinctive line here. I want to make sure that that's there. It's a rather dark shadow that's going to be right there below the beak. The eye is somewhat in shadow, but this part of the eye we want to leave a little clear area. And I'm shading before I'm done drawing. But you gotta change it up a little bit. By the way, that's not all we're gonna do as far as shading is concerned. So let's put in some of these feathers over here. I kind of have the urge to start shading. But I won't shade too much. I'm gonna shade in just a little while. Just finish quickly sketching these feathers in. There's like an imaginary little border here. See, so here we have this one, one that kind of curves up a bit. Okay, and that completes the drawing. For the hawk, the next step is to shade it, and we are going to shade it. I'm going to split this up into 2 videos so it's not too long, and there's a distinct drawing part and there's a distinct shading part, and you could watch the drawing part first and then we'll watch the shading part. So that's the end of this one. This is the drawing with all your measurements, and you should be good. Shading will start in the next video.